Good morning, everybody. I'm excited that this is actually the third talk in this session discussing smoking. And this talk will be mainly on amygdala reactivity to nicotine cues. So why do people smoke in the first place? When you ask a recreational party smoker why they smoke, they will probably say something like, I smoke because I enjoy it. I really like smoking. In contrast, if you ask someone who smokes 1 to 2 cigarette packs a day, they will say, I smoke because I need to. I crave cigarettes a lot, and I need them to get through the day. And this change from initially liking cigarettes to then really craving and wanting them has been described a lot in the literature. So you can see here, over time, the more dependent you get, the more you want and crave cigarettes, while in contrast, liking seems to decrease. So heavy smokers don't like cigarettes as much as mild smokers. So what does this mean? I think liking and wanting sounds really interchangeable, but when it comes to addiction, they describe two quite different mechanisms. In animal studies, wanting is mainly assessed by motivation. So how much effort does an animal put into getting a reward? In this case, you see a rat, and you can assess wanting by investigating how many times does this rat pull a lever to receive a reward. In contrast, liking is assessed by just looking how blissful the animal looks like when it's receiving the reward. So in this case, you see a rat that's really liking the reward, and I think that's a universal sign for this reward is awesome. But not only the paradigms that describe wanting and liking differ, also the neural areas differ a lot, and also neurotransmitters. I think the most prominent one would be dopamine, which is associated a lot with wanting, but not so much with liking. So when dopamine levels change, wanting changes, but liking doesn't seem to change so much. So we were interested in how wanting and liking changes in human smokers with respect to nicotine images. And luckily, when it comes to humans, we don't have to assess how blissful their faces look like, but we can just use, for instance, fMRI and image ratings. Oh, sorry. Go back. Yeah. So our smokers had to rate 330 different images with respect to how much they liked the images and also how much they craved the cigarette when they saw the image. So here you can see a couple of examples. For instance, on the top left, you can see chopsticks. People really seem to like chopsticks, but obviously they don't crave a cigarette when they see them. In contrast, on the bottom in the middle, there's a cigarette in the image, so people crave a cigarette when they see this image. But you can also clearly see that it's an adult smoking in front of a child, so liking ratings were really low. So liking and wanting ratings don't necessarily have to be similar, and they differ a lot. And just in case you're interested in those images, you want to play around with them, you want to create your own paradigm or just enjoy looking at them, we've created a... What? Oh, yeah. No. Yeah. We've created a database, and you can just download them from our Smoke Your Day website. Okay, so now to the fMRI paradigm. Before people came to the scanner, they had to fill out a couple of questionnaires on smoking behavior and so on. And after they were scanned, they had to rate the images. We did this just to make sure that when they were in the scanner, they would see the images for the very first time and there was no repetition. The fMRI design was pretty simple. It was just a passive viewing paradigm in a fast event-related design. So people saw a smoking cue, fixation cross, smoking cue, fixation cross, and so on. And you can see here for every smoking cue, we had a rating in terms of wanting and liking. And we then could use all of those ratings as parametric modulators. That means we can use those ratings to see what brain areas are specifically driven by the wanting aspect of the images, what brain areas are specifically driven by the liking aspect of the images. And some of the brain areas are clearly driven by both, some are only driven by one of them, as you can see here on the right. And here are the results. So driven by both the liking and the wanting ratings of the images were the hippocampus, the VMPFC, so ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and also the visual cortex and the fusiform face area, just driven by the visual features of the images. But we were more interested in what's different between wanting and liking. What areas are only driven by liking or by wanting. So we found that the amygdala only seemed to be driven by the liking ratings, but not so much by the wanting ratings. While in contrast, the nucleus accumbens was only driven by the wanting aspect of the images, but not so much by the liking. The nucleus accumbens is not super surprising. When it comes to literature, it's like a really strong hub in the addiction network, and it appears a lot in all those reviews and meta-analysis. The nucleus accumbens is really involved in the wanting and craving. The amygdala, in contrast, was a bit surprising, because when you look at the literature and all of those meta-analysis, you always find the amygdala to be involved in nicotine cue-reactivity and craving, and we weren't sure why we found this difference, because we clearly found that the amygdala in our case was way more driven by the liking aspect of the image than the wanting. And one reason for this could be that usually when people assess cue-reactivity, they use block designs, so they don't necessarily disentangle the liking and the wanting aspect of the image. And maybe what they see in those cue-reactivity paradigms is more the liking that's driving the amygdala rather than the wanting. And yeah, this is already a quite strong indicator that maybe it's better to use parametric designs when it comes to cue-reactivity rather than block designs, because otherwise you can never disentangle those two image dimensions, and you're never sure whether you're looking at liking or wanting. And for the amygdala, that's really important. For the other areas, as you've seen before, liking is sometimes even more strongly driving those areas, or liking and wanting are driving those areas, so it's not super important. And another really interesting finding we made when we then dug a bit more deeper into the amygdala and how it's driven by those ratings was that the amygdala seemed to be driven by wanting ratings way more strongly when the smokers were heavy smokers as compared to mild smokers. So here on the left, you can see a graph depicting the Fagerström dependence score that just tells you how dependent a smoker is. And the more dependent and addicted a smoker was, the more his or her amygdala was driven by the wanting rating. Same for the number of cigarettes. In contrast, we didn't find this for liking. There was even a slight decrease, even though not significant. And when you now think back to what I've showed you in the beginning, there seems to be some similarity to this model I showed you, where wanting increases over time the more dependent you get, while this is not the case for liking, and liking even slightly decreases. So just to sum everything up, the amygdala seems to be more strongly driven by the liking aspect of the images than the wanting, and maybe it's better to use parametric design so you can disentangle. And also, wanting seems to be more strongly driving the amygdala in heavy smokers as compared to mild smokers, while this is not the case for liking. Just in case you have any really specific or detailed questions, just come to my poster, or if you're a smoker and you want to complain about being a smoker in Singapore, you can come as well. Thank you.